All right, so if you haven't figured it out already, I'm wearing the same clothes as I did on Monday, right? It's actually Monday, and I'm making videos for the whole week, all on the same day, because I only work at the library a couple of days a week. So this is going to be for Thursday, April 2nd, and we're going to be reading chapter 7 and 8 of the Boxcar Children. So here's chapter 7. We've got a picture. It looks like there's their clothesline. Yep, a couple of the kids there. All right, so let's get started for today. A big meal from little onions. The next morning, Jessie and Henry talked about the queer noise. They did not tell Violet and Benny. What do you think it was? Asked Jessie. Do you think it was a rabbit? I don't know, said Henry, but I think someone was in the woods. I'm glad we weren't hurt. Someone must have stepped on a stick and made it crack. What shall we do? Asked Jessie. Nothing, said Henry. Watch is a good watchdog. He loves us now, and if anyone tried to hurt us, Watch would take care of us. He would do more than growl, but after this we must not let Benny go into the woods alone. I'll keep Benny and Violet with me all the time, said Jessie. Good, said Henry, and keep Watch with you all the time, too. Good morning, Benny. Time to get up. Today you must build something for me out of stones. What is it? Asked Benny eagerly. I'm not going to tell you, said Henry, laughing. You build it just as Jessie tells you, and you will see. Henry was so eager to begin work that he ran all the way to town. The doctor came to the door and smilingly looked him over from head to foot. My mother will tell you what to do today, the doctor said. She wants you to work in her garden. Mrs. Moore, the doctor's mother, had a sweet face and looked very kind. Good morning, Henry, she said. Do you know how to thin out vegetables? Oh, yes, said Henry. I like to work in a vegetable garden. I haven't had much time to take care of my garden, Mrs. Moore said. There, see that? She pulled out a carrot. It had to come out, for it was much too near the other carrots. Yes, I see, said Henry. He began to thin out the carrots. Mrs. Moore watched him as he pulled out some of the little carrots and put them in a pile. He left the other carrots to grow. Then he began on the turnips. You are a good worker, said Mrs. Moore. I can see that. She smiled at Henry. You may thin out all these vegetables. Then she went into the house and left Henry alone. He worked all morning. He thinned out the carrots, turnips, and little onions. The mill bells rang at noon, but Henry did not hear them. He still worked on in the hot sun. Then he saw Mrs. Moore looking at him. You've worked long enough now, she said. You may come in this afternoon. Oh, come again this afternoon. What shall I do with the vegetables I pulled up? Henry asked. Oh, I don't want them, said Mrs. Moore. Just leave them in a pile. Do you mind if I take them? Asked Henry. No, indeed. Do you have chickens? Then, without waiting for an answer, she went right on. You have done good work. Here is $1. Henry said, thank you, and was glad he did not have to answer about the chickens. When Mrs. Moore went into the house, he took some of the little carrots and turnips and onions. If he had looked up, he would have seen Mrs. Moore in the window watching him, but he did not look up. He was too eager to get to the store and order some meat. When he arrived at the boxcar, Benny told him, The building is done. I helped with it. The building was a fireplace made of flat stones. Benny did a lot of the work, said Jessie. He carried stones and found wood for the fire. The fireplace was a very good one. The children and Watch had made a hole at the foot of a big rock between two trees. Here we go, a picture of their new fireplace. Flat stones were laid on the floor of this hole and around the sides. More big stones were put up to keep out the wind. Jessie had found a heavy wire in the dump and had put the big kettle on it and tied the ends of the wire to the two trees. The kettle hung over the fireplace, and the fire was laid. Beside the fireplace was a big wood pile. Fine, fine, cried Henry. You have done well. Now see what I have. The girls were delighted with the meat and the little vegetables. With Henry's knife, they cut the meat into little pieces. Then they filled the kettle with water from the fountain and put the meat into it, with a tin plate for a cover. Henry started the fire, and it burned well at once. Jessie cut the tops off the vegetables and washed them in the brook. I'll put them in after the meat has cooked a while, she said. Soon the water began to boil, and the stew began to smell good. Watch sat down and looked at it. He sniffed hungrily at it, and barked and barked. The children sat around the fireplace eating bread and milk. Now and then Jessie stirred the stew with a big spoon. It will make a good meal, said Henry. Keep it boiling, and do not leave it. When I come home tonight, I'll bring you some salt. Whatever you do, don't get on fire. Violet pointed to the pitcher and teapot that she had filled with water. That's to put on Benny or watch if he should get on fire, she said. Ooh. Henry laughed and went happily on his way. He wished he could stay and smell the stew boiling, but he thought he ought to work. So he went back to Dr. Moore's house. He was very happy when Dr. Moore said, Do you want to clean up this garage? The garage was not in very good order. Dr. Moore laughed when he saw Henry look around for a broom. I must go out now, said Dr. Moore. You just clean up this place. So Henry began at once. First he opened all the boxes. On the biggest box he painted the word tools with a long-handled brush and a can of paint that he had found. On another box he painted nails. Then he picked over the things and put the tools in the toolbox and the nails in the nail box. This was fun for Henry because he liked to get things in order. Henry found a lot of nails that were bent and covered with rust. He put them in his pocket. I'll ask the doctor for these bent nails, he said to himself. They're no good to him, but they are fine for me. I can use every old nail I get. Then he washed the floor and washed his paintbrush. When Dr. Moore came home, he found Henry putting brushes, paint cans, and other things on the shelf. My, he cried. He looked at the garage and laughed and laughed. He laughed until his mother came out to see what he was laughing at. Look, Mother, he said. Look at those tools. Look at the shelf. Look at my hammers. 1, 2, 3, 4 hammers. Your hammer, my hammer, and 2 other hammers. They were all lost. Can you use a hammer, Henry? Yes, indeed I can, cried Henry. Take one, said Dr. Moore. You found them all. Oh, thank you, said Henry. He showed the doctor the bent nails and was told that he could have those too. He could hardly wait now to start home because he was so eager to show Benny and his sisters his new hammer and nails. Tomorrow will be Sunday, said Dr. Moore. Will you come again the next day? Oh, yes, replied Henry, who had lost all track of the days. The cherries must be picked, said the doctor. He looked at Henry in a strange way. We could use any number of cherry pickers, if they were all as careful as you. Could you? Asked Henry eagerly. Well, I'll come. So the 3 said goodbye, and Henry started for home. He had another $1, a pocket full of old nails, a hammer, and the pile of vegetables that he had left at noon. On the way home, he brought some salt. When he arrived at the boxcar, he began to smell a delicious smell. Onions, he shouted, running up to the kettle. I do like the smell of onions. I like the turnips best, said Violet. Jessie took off the cover carefully and stirred in the salt, and Henry sniffed the brown stew. It was boiling and boiling. Oh, a ladle of all things, cried Henry. Where did you get it? I found a tin cup in the dump, said Jessie. We used a long stick for a handle and tied it to the cup with a piece of wire. It makes a fine ladle. She ladled out the stew into plates and bowls and put a spoon in each one. Oh, said Benny, I'm so hungry. I must eat my supper. The meat was well cooked, and the vegetables were delicious. Violet passed her plate for more turnips. I'd like some more onions, said Henry. All the children ate until they could eat no more. That was the best meal I ever ate, said Jessie. Me too, said Violet. I have time tonight to make Benny's cart, remarked Henry. We'll want a cart. Will you make it with my wheels? Asked Benny. Yes, with your wheels, answered Henry. But you must cart stones in it when I get it done. Yes, said Benny, I will cart stones, or rocks, or anything. Tomorrow will be Sunday, and I can stay home, Henry went on. Do you think it's all right, Jessie, to build the dam for a swimming pool on Sunday? Yes, I do, said Jessie. We're making the swimming pool so that we can keep clean. Henry began happily to hammer out the bent nails with his new hammer. Soon he had some good nails. You and I will go and find some boards, Benny, he said. Come on. Soon the boys came back with some boards from the dump. Henry sat down and began to make the cart. He could not see very well because it was getting dark, and there was no moon. But at last the cart was done, and he gave it to Benny. "Thank you," said Benny politely. After his sisters had admired the cart, Benny pulled it around just for fun. Then Henry put it in the boxcar for the night. Henry said to Jessie, "I hope we do not hear that strange noise tonight." "I hope not too," said Jessie. Then she laughed. "Look at Benny," she said. "He's gone to sleep with his hands on his cart." Henry laughed too, but he laughed at himself because he was going to sleep with his new hammer under his pillow. The end of chapter 7. Here is chapter 8. They are going to make their swimming pool. A swimming pool at last. The Boxcar children were so tired that they slept until 10 o'clock Sunday morning. When they woke up at last, they hurried through breakfast and went to work on the swimming pool. "We'll make a dam across the brook," said Henry. "Here's my cart," said Benny. "All cart stones and logs in it." "Good for you," Henry laughed. First, the four children went down to the brook to look at the pool Jessie had seen. The water was quiet here, and there was clean sand all around the little pool. "It's big enough for a swimming pool," Henry remarked, "but I don't think it's deep enough." He put a long stick in it to see how deep it was. When he looked at the wet stick, he found that the water was only about a foot deep. "The swimming pool should be 3 times as deep," he said. "Then it will be deep enough to swim in and won't be too deep for Benny. We'll build the dam here with logs and stones." While the other children started the dam, Jessie washed all their stockings. "We won't want our stockings on while we're working in the brook," she remarked, as she rinsed them and hung them on the clothesline to dry. "So this is a good time to wash them." It was hard work building the dam, but the children liked hard work. Henry and Jessie pulled the logs to the brook, and Violet and Benny carried the stones, with the help of the cart. Now and then Henry was called on to help with a heavy stone, but the 2 younger children carried most of them. "Splash the stones right into the water," Henry told them, "but be careful to keep them in a line between these 2 trees. The children watched with delighted eyes as the wall of stones under the water began to grow higher and higher. "The rock wall will help to hold the logs in place," said Henry. At last it was time to lay the logs across the brook. "Let's lay the first ones between these 2 trees," said Jessie. "Then the trees will hold both ends of the logs." "Good work," cried Henry, much pleased. "That's just what we'll do." But when the first big log was splashed into place on top of the stone wall, the water began to run over the top of the log and around both ends. "Oh dear," cried Jessie. "The water runs around the ends every time. What shall we do?" "We'll have to put lots of logs on, with brush between them," said Henry. "We'll put on so many that the water can't get through." They laid 3 logs across, with 3 more on top of them, and 3 more on top of those. Violet filled her arms with brush and held it in place until each log was laid. Benny filled the holes at the ends of the logs with flat stones. Such wet children never were seen before, but the hot sun would dry them off, and no one cared. When the 3 top logs were laid in place at last, the 4 tired children sat down to watch the pool fill. But Henry could not sit still as the water came higher and higher up the dam. "See how deep the pool is getting," he cried. "See how still it is." At last the pool was full, and the water came over the top of the dam and made another waterfall. "Just like a mill dam," said Henry. "Now the pool is deep enough for us all to swim in." "You boys have the first swim," said Jessie. "We girls must go and get dinner. We'll ring the bell when we're ready." The boys splashed around the pool while the girls made a fire and hung the kettle of brown stew over it, stirring it now and then. Violet cut the bread and then got the butter, hard and cold, out of the refrigerator. And let's take a look at this picture. There are the boys and the dog, right, swimming in their new pool. Looks like fun on a hot day, huh? When everything was ready, Jessie rang the dinner bell. This bell was only a tin can from the dump. Jessie had hung it on the tree with a string, and she rang it with a spoon. Then she got the ladle and began ladling out the stew. "That's the dinner bell," said Benny. "I know it is. Come, Watch. Don't you want some dinner?" Watch had had a swim, too. He came out of the water and shook himself. The 2 boys put on their dry clothes and went to Sunday dinner. Let me ring the bell again, said Benny. I like stew even better today, said Henry, eating hungrily. That's because we worked so hard, remarked Jessie. Let's go for a walk in the woods this afternoon. Oh, let's, cried Violet. Let's go exploring again. The children washed the dishes and then started on their walk. As they went along, Watch began to bark. At first, the explorers were frightened. Oh, what is it? Cried Violet. Maybe it's a rabbit, said Henry. Then they saw a hen running away through the woods. Watch ran after her, but Henry called him back. Don't run after the poor hen, he said. The hen had a nest, remarked Benny. What? Asked Jessie. She had some eggs in it, said Benny. Come here and see. Jessie looked on the ground where Benny was pointing and saw a nest with 5 eggs in it. A runaway hen, said Jessie. She wanted to hide her nest so that she would have some chickens. We'll have the eggs for supper. I know how to cook eggs. The eggs made a delicious supper. Jessie put them in a bowl with a little salt, and Violet took a spoon and stirred them as hard as she could. Put in some milk, Violet, said Jessie, and stir them some more. Henry started up the fire. The big kettle was hung over the fire, and Jessie put in some butter. She watched the butter until it was nice and brown, and then she put in the eggs. Sit down, she said. Be all ready to eat when the eggs are done. Violet put the blue tablecloth on the ground. She got the butter and the bread and the plates and spoons, and the children all sat, ready for supper. Here I come, cried Jessie. Hold out your plates. Oh, Jessie, cried Benny, this is the best meal I ever ate. I found the eggs and you cooked them. Yes, you did, Benny, said Henry. Thank you for a fine meal. Tomorrow we'll have to eat bread and milk, said Jessie. But when tomorrow came, the children had more than bread and milk, as you will soon see. All right, so that's the end for today. Next day we'll be reading chapters 9 and 10. Good night.